Go into the silence and shut the door behind you. Neville Goddard. Have you felt it? That growing distance between you and the need to explain yourself. The way words seem to lose their urgency when you finally start believing in what you've imagined. You used to share every insight, every desire, trying to bring others along with you. But now, something in you has gone quiet. Not because you're hiding, but because speaking it would somehow shrink it. There comes a point where explaining feels like betrayal, not to others but to your own inner certainty. And the moment you stop needing people to understand is the moment you begin to understand the real power of assumption. You're not pulling away from others because you're cold or confused. You're simply no longer willing to water down what's becoming real in you. Neville Goddard didn't teach manifestation as a group effort. He taught it as a personal recognition of the God within. And when you begin to recognize that, the noise around you starts to fade. You begin to realize that most conversations were just attempts to get permission for what your soul already knew. Now that need is dissolving. And what's left? Stillness. Not emptiness. Not loneliness. Just stillness. And in that stillness, something begins to stabilize. Not louder thoughts. Not better arguments. Just being. Pure awareness. You may have noticed this shift in your own life. You answer fewer calls. You feel no urge to justify your plans. You watch people expect you to perform the old version of yourself, but you don't. And maybe they don't understand, but that no longer matters. This isn't about becoming distant or cold. It's about becoming clear. And clarity doesn't scream. It doesn't campaign. It doesn't perform. It just lives. In the minutes ahead, you'll see why silence has become your strongest signal. Why you're not here to argue your desire into existence. Why the urge to explain is often the last layer of doubt trying to survive. You'll understand that the need to be understood was never yours to begin with. It was borrowed from a self you no longer are. And now that you're beginning to truly assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you can finally let it all go. The need to justify, the need to be seen as reasonable, the need to be liked, approved, or understood. None of that belongs to who you are now. Let's continue. Silence isn't isolation, it's sovereignty. There is a moment in the manifestation process that few talk about. A point when your desire no longer needs constant affirming, scripting, or discussion. Instead, it begins to settle into you like something already owned. And with that comes silence. Not the kind that feels like absence, but the kind that feels like presence. A full, steady, living quiet. You stop sharing every intention. You stop performing excitement. And you stop needing others to validate the direction you're facing. Neville called it the secret place. A chamber within consciousness where your assumption becomes law, not suggestion. When he said, "Enter into your closet and shut the door," he wasn't talking about hiding from the world. He was pointing to the state of inward focus where you commune with the only thing that matters, your own I am. And in that space, you don't argue, you don't announce, you don't plead, you simply assume. This kind of silence isn't a retreat, it's a throne. It is the exact moment you shift from asking to knowing, from hoping to claiming. It is the silence of sovereignty, the stillness of someone who knows they don't have to prove anything anymore. Not because they've lost their voice, but because they've found their power. Most people equate silence with absence, but in truth, this is the most alive you've ever been. You begin to feel things before they arrive. You walk into rooms less, but your presence extends further. You don't post about your growth, and yet your life starts reflecting it without effort. The ones around you might call it distance, but it's not distance. It's refinement. You are no longer scattered in explanation. You are centered in awareness. There's a sacredness in this, a protective energy that builds when you stop exposing every dream to outside weather. Because every time you speak a thing too soon, you invite it to be judged by minds that cannot see it. And what's judged contracts. But what is kept in stillness expands. What is guarded in silence ripens. Have you ever noticed how the most transformative ideas come when no one else is speaking? When you're still alone walking through a quiet street or lying in bed in the early hours? That's not coincidence. That's consciousness clearing space for the new state to reveal itself. You are not avoiding life. You are meeting it where it actually happens, inside. The more you tune into this, the less urgent the external becomes. You realize you're not here to be constantly explaining your evolution. You're here to embody it. Because once you've assumed your new state, once you've claimed it internally, there's nothing left to announce. That is not isolation. That is alignment. That is sovereignty. You may have stepped back from social life. You may have reduced contact, kept quiet, even gone completely off the grid. But if your inner conversations are still filled with explanation, defense, or silent argument, then you haven't truly withdrawn. You've just relocated the noise, and that noise still creates. Neville said, "Your inner speech mirrors your life. You may no longer be texting them, calling them, or attending those familiar gatherings. But if in the silence you are mentally rehearsing what you would have said, what you should have said, or what you wish they understood, then you are still energetically entangled with the old version of yourself. You are still feeding the very state you are trying to leave behind. The truth is, many of us leave a room physically, but stay there mentally for days. We replay comments. We silently justify our decisions. We imagine how others will perceive our silence, and we start composing internal monologues that were never asked for. And all of this inner explaining, becomes the seed of our outer world. Your inner speech is not commentary, it's command. Every time you argue in your head, you instruct your subconscious to keep that relationship, that tension, or that identity alive. Think of your imagination as a stage. When you're replaying an old conversation, you're not just reflecting, you're rehearsing. You are casting roles, assigning meaning, and giving life to scenes you should have left behind. That old boss, that skeptical friend, that relative who always doubts your decisions. They're still on your mental stage, performing a play you no longer want to attend. And yet, by imagining their reactions, their questions, or their judgments, you keep renewing the ticket. The invitation here is not to force silence, but to become aware of the mental conversations that are running automatically, not to suppress your thoughts, but to redirect them. Instead of justifying your decisions to an invisible audience, can you imagine being understood without a word? Instead of mentally arguing your worth, can you feel the ease of being already chosen, already secure, already valid? You don't need to win the debate in your mind. You only need to stop having it. Neville often emphasized that everything begins in imagination, but most forget that imagination includes the subtle tone of our inner voice, not just what we picture, but how we speak to and about ourselves and others. And the most potent form of manifestation is not the one spoken out loud, but the one repeated silently and consistently in the quiet of your own awareness. So pause for a moment. Scan your inner world. Who are you still explaining yourself to in silence? Who are you still trying to convince? And can you let that conversation dissolve, not because it's resolved, but because it no longer defines who you are? Let your inner speech reflect the version of you who no longer needs agreement to feel valid. The one who knows that the most powerful words are the ones that don't need to be said. Stop justifying the dream to those who can't see it. It's tempting to explain, to say, "I'm working on something," or "I have a vision," or "You'll understand later." But the moment you feel the need to justify what you desire, you've already begun to question it yourself. Explanation often wears the disguise of confidence, but beneath it lies a subtle hesitation, a voice still seeking agreement. Neville taught that assumption is quiet. It does not campaign. It does not negotiate. It accepts the end and moves from it. The law of assumption does not require you to convince anyone. In fact, the more you explain your dream to someone who cannot see it, the more you diminish your own alignment with it, because explanation implies doubt. It says, "I still need you to believe in what I believe so I can feel safe holding this vision." But creation doesn't work that way. Creation moves from the inside out, not from public consensus. When you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, when you truly live in the end, there is no audience. There is no committee. There is no need for external approval. There is only the internal fact of being. Imagine an artist painting a masterpiece that no one else can understand in its early stages. If that artist keeps interrupting the process to explain every brushstroke, they will never finish the work. Worse, they may begin to second-guess it. The same happens with manifestation. When you're in the middle of embodying a new state, whether that's abundance, health, freedom, or love, it often won't make sense to others. And it's not supposed to. It's not their state. It's yours. You are not here to persuade people into seeing what you see. You are here to walk in it, quietly, steadily, until the invisible becomes visible. When Neville said, "Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled," he meant assume it without needing anyone else to verify it. Because in truth, the only approval you need is your own agreement with the version of yourself who already has it. There's a kind of sacred power that builds when you keep your dream private, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Not everything is meant to be discussed. Some things are meant to be lived into, felt into, assumed without announcement. And yes, there will be people who question your choices, who ask, what are you really doing with your life? Who don't understand why you've stepped away or changed direction or grown quieter. But their confusion is not your problem to solve. It is not your task to carry someone else's lack of vision. It is your task to stay true to what you have already accepted within. So let go of the need to explain why you've changed. Let go of the instinct to justify what you're building. And let go of the habit of waiting for someone to nod in approval before you feel allowed to proceed. You are already permitted. You are already worthy. You are already becoming. And the more you rest in that quiet certainty, the more the world begins to shift. Not because you explained yourself into a new life, but because you assumed it, silently, and became it. Before we continue, pause for a moment and ask yourself this. Who are you when no one is watching? When there's no one left to convince? That version of you, the one who knows, not hopes, that's the one creating your life, right now. If this is resonating, you'll want to check the pinned comment below. There's something there that speaks directly to this quiet shift you're living. Not everyone will see it, but if you're watching this far, it's likely meant for you. Let's keep going. Every time you feel the need to explain your vision, your process, or your path, you're spending something invisible. Not time, not logic, something far more subtle, your energy. The more you explain, the more you fragment your own assumption. Because what you're really doing in those moments is seeking reassurance that you're allowed to believe what you already know is true. Neville said, I am is the only reality. Not, I am if they agree. Not, I am once they understand. Just I am. That statement is a declaration. It doesn't ask. It doesn't consult. It simply assumes. And in that assumption, it creates. But when you explain, you dilute. You try to translate your inner certainty into someone else's language, and in doing so, you start to question the very thing you once held so clearly. Over-explaining is often a symptom of insecurity, dressed as logic. You feel the impulse to clarify your choices, to justify your inner direction, because a part of you is still looking for external permission. But manifestation does not wait for consensus. It waits for embodiment, and embodiment is quiet. It is complete in itself. Think of your attention like currency. Every time you shift it outward to defend your choices, to provide background for your silence, to assure others that your absence is not rejection, you're spending that currency. And for what? What has truly changed in your life after explaining your soul to someone who isn't even listening on that frequency? Imagine a candle that keeps relighting itself each time it flickers out. But every time you explain yourself, you expose that flame to the wind of someone else's uncertainty. And slowly, that flame weakens. It burns low. It forgets its shape. But when you stop explaining, when you let your inner knowing stand without commentary, the flame grows still. It glows steady. Over-explaining doesn't make you clearer, it makes you tired, and not just physically but spiritually. It separates you from the state you're assuming, because instead of living in it, you're constantly reporting on it. You're narrating instead of embodying. And every time you narrate, you step slightly outside of the moment you were meant to live. The state of the wish fulfilled has no script. It doesn't owe anyone a story. It simply feels like it's done. And that feeling, that quiet finality, is your true source of power. When you know, really know, that you are what you desire, then no explanation is necessary. Your life begins to express it. Your energy begins to carry it. And your presence becomes your only answer. So consider this. What would happen if today you stopped explaining altogether? What would shift if you allowed your silence to speak for you? Could you sit in the power of I am with nothing added? No modifiers, no excuses. Just the bare living truth of being. You don't need to explain the sun to prove it shines. You don't need to explain your becoming to prove it's real. Your silence, when anchored in true assumption, is the loudest thing in the room. Let that be enough. It's not always your thoughts that pull you back. It's the mirrors around you. The people who remember you not as who you're becoming, but as who you've been. They greet you in the role you're trying to release. They respond to the version of you that no longer feels alive, and with every interaction they invite you to play that part one more time. Neville said, "You are what you believe yourself to be." But what happens when you're surrounded by others who only believe in your past? When your environment reflects everything you've outgrown, it takes a subtle toll on your ability to remain in the new state. Even when you're not consciously agreeing with their image of you, Your body remembers how to respond. You smile on cue. You nod out of habit. And without realizing it, you've stepped back into a character that you've already buried in imagination. That's the danger of familiarity. It doesn't recognize who you are now. It keeps echoing who you used to be. And unless you're alert, unless you're firmly anchored in your assumption, that echo becomes a trap. You start adjusting yourself to be understandable again. You shrink your vision to be more acceptable. And slowly, you re-enter the state you were trying to leave. This isn't about blaming others. It's about understanding the invisible mechanics of identity. Every person in your life holds a version of you in their mind. And when you're in their presence, that version has gravity. If they see you as limited, you feel the weight of that perception. If they see you as always struggling, always second-guessing, always needing guidance, even if you don't say a word, you may begin to feel small in your own imagination. That is why time away becomes so vital. Not because you hate the crowd, but because you must recalibrate your self-image without interruption. You must remember who you are without anyone telling you otherwise, even silently. Silence is not just a lack of words. It is the absence of external identity projections. And in that absence, your true self can breathe. The crowd is not malicious, but it is static. It sees what has been, not what is becoming. And if you stay too long in its presence, you may start seeing the same. That's why stepping away isn't selfish. It's necessary. You cannot assume a new state while being constantly reminded of the old one. Ask yourself, who around you still speaks to your past? Who treats your transformation as a phase instead of a fact? Who would rather have the version of you they're comfortable with, instead of the version that makes them question their own reflection? These are not judgments. They are observations. And once you see them clearly, you understand why Neville placed so much emphasis on inner conviction. Because only your belief in yourself can override the accumulated images of you in others' minds. When you stop showing up for the old script, when you refuse to perform the outdated role, the cast around you will either adjust or exit. But the first shift is yours. You must be willing to stand in the new state long enough, firmly enough, that it becomes more real to you than any reflection trying to pull you back. And once that happens, the crowd loses its grip, not because you fought them, but because you no longer respond. The old state collapses not with force, but with disinterest. You are no longer available to be who you used to be, and that more than anything is freedom. You don't always lose people because of conflict. Sometimes you simply stop reflecting who they believe you are. As your inner state changes, your external mirrors shift or disappear. What once felt natural begins to feel strained. Conversations lose their rhythm. Familiar spaces start to feel foreign. Neville said, "You must be willing to lose everything to gain your real self." That loss often looks like silence, distance, and endings without explanation. It's not personal. It's the natural shedding of identities no longer sustained by your assumption. Old relationships mirror old states. If you've assumed something new, abundance, freedom, love, you can't keep acting from lack just to maintain connection. When your reflection no longer matches the mirror, the image fades. That's not loneliness. That's accuracy. There's nothing to force, nothing to fix. Let what falls away, fall. In time, new reflections emerge. People who meet you without history, who don't need the old version of you to feel safe. They appear not because you seek them, but because your new state requires them. When the mirror changes, the world responds. Quietly, naturally, inevitably. Being misunderstood isn't a setback. It's often the first sign you're no longer living from your old state. When your assumptions shift, your energy does too. And others feel that before they understand it. You may notice friends pulling back, conversations feeling misaligned, or loved ones questioning your choices. Not because you've done something wrong, but because they no longer recognize the role you used to play. Neville taught that consciousness is the only reality. If you've changed your concept of self, then confusion from others is evidence that you're no longer projecting the same identity. Their misunderstanding is a mirror of your own evolution, and while it may feel uncomfortable, it's also confirmation. We often rush to explain ourselves when misunderstood, hoping to ease the tension. But that explanation pulls you back into the state you've already left. The need to clarify is a subtle plea to be seen by those who can only view you through an outdated lens. Instead, hold your new assumption quietly. Let the misunderstanding be a sign that you're no longer available for your former patterns. You're not here to be understood. You're here to remember that I am is enough even when no one else agrees. Your desire doesn't need a witness. Manifestation is not a public ritual. It's an inner alignment. Your desire doesn't need to be seen, understood, or approved by anyone else in order to be real. The moment you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, creation is complete. Not when others believe you, but when you believe yourself. Neville said, "Creation is finished." That means your work isn't to announce your becoming. It's to live from it. Seeking witnesses for your desire often reveals a hidden hesitation, a need for reflection to feel secure in what you've already claimed. But real assumption doesn't perform. It doesn't ask, "Did you see that?" It simply knows. Imagine planting a seed and then asking others every day if they can see it growing. Their answer would mean nothing. The growth is already underway, beneath the surface, beyond opinion. So it is with desire. It unfolds in stillness, quietly, without observation. Let your assumption be private, not secret, but sacred, not hidden in fear, but protected by certainty. You don't need anyone to understand what's becoming real in you. The desire is yours, and your belief is the only witness it ever required. Imagination doesn't ask for permission. Your imagined self doesn't need to be approved. It doesn't wait for others to agree before it lives. It simply assumes its place, and by doing so, begins to shape the world around it. Just like an actor steps into a role without checking if the audience believes it yet, your inner world must move first, without hesitation, without negotiation. Neville said, "Imagination is the only redemptive power in the universe. That power is yours to wield, but only when you stop asking whether it's okay to be who you already are in consciousness. The moment you seek validation, you pause embodiment. The moment you explain, you exit the state and re-enter the one that doubts. You are not here to convince the world that your vision is worthy. You are here to feel it so deeply that the world reorganizes itself to match. No artist asks if their vision is acceptable before they create it. They move from it, boldly, silently, fully. So stop waiting to be seen, liked, or understood. You don't need permission to be the version of yourself you've already accepted. The only approval required is your own. The world will catch up, or it won't. But your assumption remains law. Fasting isn't only about food. Sometimes it's about energy, attention, space. If your mind is constantly digesting opinions, conversations, and commentary, there's little room left for the stillness required to assume a new state. A social detox isn't avoidance, it's alignment. Neville taught that all transformation begins in consciousness, but to access that inner space, you need clarity, not noise, not feedback, and certainly not the endless stream of other people's doubts disguised as advice. Silence becomes sacred not because it is empty, but because it is clean. It clears the mental clutter so your assumption can settle without resistance. Imagine clearing a room before painting it. You move the furniture, remove the dust, create space for something new to emerge. That's what a social detox does. It's not about cutting people off with resentment. It's about choosing presence over performance. Listening inward before speaking outward. Give yourself permission to fast from the need to update, to explain, to respond. Step away not because the world is wrong, but because your inner world is asking for your full attention. Creation doesn't thrive in a crowd. It thrives in consciousness, focused, undistracted, whole. Every time you explain, you acknowledge a gap. You reinforce the idea that something isn't quite real yet, that it still needs to be clarified, defended, or proven. But assumption doesn't explain. It accepts. It moves as though what's desired is already here because in consciousness, it is. Neville said, "To be conscious of being something is to be that which you are conscious of being." The moment you try to explain your state, you step outside of it. You become an observer of your desire rather than the embodiment of it. And embodiment is what creates. Explanations often come from a subtle disbelief. A part of you still unsure, still seeking confirmation. So you talk about your process, you outline your reasoning. You hope someone will reflect it back and say, "Yes, that makes sense." But making sense to others is not the goal. Feeling real within is. When you truly live from the end, there's nothing to explain. You wouldn't describe how water tastes to prove you're drinking it. You just drink. The same is true for assumption. The state of the wish fulfilled is quiet, certain, whole. It does not explain. It expresses, silently, consistently, inevitably, letting go of the need to be seen as good. Much of what keeps people entangled in old social patterns is not love. It's the need to be seen as kind, reasonable, or good. But trying to maintain a likable image often means shrinking the truth of who you are. You stay in conversations you've outgrown, respond to messages out of guilt, and soften your clarity so it doesn't make others uncomfortable. Neville didn't teach appeasement. He taught awareness, the kind that knows who it is without external approval. I am is not concerned with reputation. It does not negotiate with others' comfort. It simply is, and that is the kind of authority required to fully embody a new state. When you identify with being good, you become vulnerable to misunderstanding. You try to manage perception, but perception is not your business. Your state is. And your state does not need to be justified with politeness or explained away with excuses. Being misread is not failure. It is often the cost of alignment. Letting go of being seen as good means allowing others to form opinions without chasing after them. It means choosing wholeness over approval. You are not here to be understood. You are here to understand that I am is God, and that is enough. There comes a point in conscious creation when silence no longer feels like absence, but authority. You stop needing to convince. You stop reaching for confirmation. You stop narrating your transformation for others to follow along. Not because you've become cold or indifferent, but because you've discovered something far more stable than approval: presence. Neville Goddard taught that assumption, if persisted in, will harden into fact. But that persistence doesn't always look like repetition or intensity. More often it looks like steadiness, a quiet refusal to exit the state you've claimed, even when no one else sees it yet. Especially then, as you release the urge to explain yourself, you begin to realize how much of your energy was spent in defense, not of your desires, but of your right to have them. Every justification was a small betrayal of your inner knowing. Every performance was a way of saying, please believe this with me, so I can feel safe believing it alone. But now, you no longer need to be believed. You only need to be, here, now, fully, in the assumption that it is already done. Let others wonder where you've gone. Let them misread your silence. Let them call your clarity distance or detachment. You no longer need to be translated to be true. You no longer need to be palatable to be powerful. The ones who resonate with who you're becoming will not need an explanation. They will feel it. They will recognize it, not because you presented it, but because you lived it. And when the temptation to return to old patterns arises, to send the message, to clarify the decision, to explain the vision, remember, every time you re-enter the old conversation, you delay the embodiment of the new state. Let your transformation speak through outcomes, not explanations. Let your life prove what your words no longer need to. You are not being distant. You are being direct, with yourself, with your state, with your assumption. And in that directness, a new world begins to unfold, quietly, naturally, inevitably. Now, take this moment and settle into yourself, the version of you that no longer needs to be discussed to be real. Let that be the end of the conversation and the beginning of embodiment. And if you felt seen, challenged, or deeply recognized in any part of this, there's something waiting for you. It's just beneath the surface, tucked inside the pinned comment. Take a breath, follow your curiosity, and see what's waiting for you there.